Okay. Are you all able to see just panelists, or do you see both? Okay. We'll give everyone a few more minutes to get in here, so. Okay, it's 11:01, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning to all of you, and welcome to today's webinar, English Language Learners, Asset-Minded Teaching. Today's webinar is the final webinar in the Institute for Urban Ed's series this summer, where we have focused on topics of Black joy, talking about race in the classroom, and then today, English language learners. The IUE is committed to promoting topics focused on social justice, cultural relevance, and equity. Yet we also come to these conversations as learners and hoping to continue to grow as we support the positive changes in students in our classrooms in Kansas City. So throughout today's webinar, you're going to hear from teachers working with English language learners every day. I think none of them would claim to be experts, but they are all practitioners focused on doing what's best for their students in their classrooms. We're excited to have this conversation today and hear their perspectives on asset-minded teaching. Our format's going to be a little bit of context followed by a conversation between our panelists. And at the end of our time, we're going to invite those of you in attendance to post questions using that Q&A option. So we'll get to as many of those as time allows. So with that, we're going to move on to some introductions. My name is Jen Fergerson. I'm a coordinator here at the Institute for Urban Education. This is my 19th year in education. And prior to doing this work, I've been a classroom teacher, an instructional coach, and then I worked as a curriculum coach for English language arts. And so I'm going to turn it over to my co-facilitator for today, Dr. Amanda Vega-Mavec.
I did it. I did the whole I'm on mute thing. I am Dr. Amanda Vega-Mavec. I'm the director of the El Centro Academy for Children, which is part of the El Centro agency that has several different programmings, including education, community health, economic empowerment, and advocacy. And we are the education arm of the agency. We are a dual language Spanish-English preschool with children from ages 2.5 to 5 years old, and follow a model of 2 teachers in each classroom. Our children do not have to come from Spanish-speaking homes to attend. Most of them do, but we do have the 2 teachers in every classroom, one who stays in Spanish throughout the day and one who stays in English throughout the day.
Thank you. And then we get to meet our panelists. So with that, Toni, I'm going to start with you. Toni Moore is coming to us today. Toni, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I am Toni Moore. I have been a teacher for the last 10 years in the Kansas City, Kansas Public School District. I was a classroom teacher for 7 years. The past 3 years, I have served as an ESL teacher, and this year I'll be transitioning to the Shawnee Mission School District, where I will continue as an ESL teacher. And I am a graduate of UMKC's Institute for Urban Education.
Thanks, Toni. Megan, you want to go next?
Oh. Hi, I'm Megan Juhan. I am going into my 9th year education. I started and I'm transitioning into being a specialist for English language learners at Kansas City International Academy, a charter school in the Kansas City area. And I'm in Iowa.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Sarah, let's go next. You next.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Bourne, and I'm going into my 11th year of teaching in the Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools. I have been currently and still been a classroom teacher, and I'm teaching currently at McKinley Elementary in my 5th year, and I am also a graduate of UMKC, the School of Education.
Awesome. Thank you. Lauren.
Hey guys, I'm Lauren Chadwick. This will be my 6th year in education. I also teach at Kansas City International Academy. Next year, I will no longer be a classroom teacher. I will become an ELL specialist for K through 2. Very excited about that.
Awesome. Thank you. I thank all of you for taking some time out of your summer to be a part of this conversation today. So with that, we'll just kind of set up the time for today. So our goals, we hope that those of you in attendance kind of come away with an understanding about the impact of translanguaging in the classroom. We're going to hear a little bit about that. And also that you kind of walk away with some ideas or new thinking and strategies that lift up and use culture and language to enhance student learning and understanding. Before we get into that conversation, I want to provide just a little bit of context though for this work and why this conversation is so critical for us to have for our students. You can see here the demographics in the 2 large districts that straddle the state line here, KCKPS and KCK. You can see by the percentages alone that English language learners, it just points out the importance of this conversation. Additionally, the number of languages that are represented in our schools point out the language diversity in both districts. Since we have 2 teachers from KCIA with us today, I've also included their information as well, because it is, while a smaller charter than those districts, still representative of very diverse language learners as well as students are represented at their school as well. And so you can see that represented here. You saw in KCK, we had approximately 63 different languages represented. In KCPS, we're looking at 50 plus languages. In KCIA, approximately 15 different languages. So we wanted to provide just a really quick synopsis of what we mean when we're talking about translanguaging. Full transparency, when I was a classroom teacher, this terminology was not something that was present or something that we would hear about. Translanguaging in academia is a conceptual framework for understanding bilingualism and was popularized by Ofelia Garcia. A recent article by Laura Hamann Ortiz, Unpacking Translanguaging out of Ed Research, or excuse me, Ed Leadership. It was the December 2019, January 2020 issue. Defines translanguaging as the following. It's a reframing of bilingualism as a flexible linguistic activity that's tied to the context of its use. And so acknowledging that mixing language is an authentic practice that both bilingual and multilingual students or individuals communicate with their families, with their communities, in their classrooms, and their friends. And so it's that acknowledgement and that reframing that we want to think about. And so we think this is an important idea because we know that our systems are typically set up to portray an expectation or use a more monolingual lens. But by shifting the way we think about language, we might be able to better serve our students. And so with that, we're going to move into our conversation with our panelists today. As a reminder for those of you that are watching, as you listen to their responses and their conversation, please feel free to drop questions into the chat, and we'll try to get to those later on in our conversation. And so at this point, I think I'm going to stop the share. All right, so you no longer see my screen, right? Okay, so we're going to go ahead then and move into our questions that we have for today. And so I'm going to direct, I think
we can still see your screen. Just
oh, you can?
Yeah.
Okay, hang on here. Thank you. Megan, I think, had been frozen up there just a little bit. So Sarah, I might start this first question and direct it to you. And then if Megan comes back in here, she can have a chance to respond, but any of you can also respond if you want. Just in thinking about general strengths, when we're the focus of this is really to try to have that asset minded and building on the strengths and of language and culture for our students. How would you describe the strengths of English language learners? And what are some of the ways that you have enhanced that in your work in the classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. I say the biggest strength that I see with most of my multi-language learners is that they're always so willing to learn. They have such positive attitudes, their perseverance and like willingness to work together, collaborating with me, helping me learn more about their culture and their language, and like partnering with our ESL teachers as well. I think a big part too is like, their emotional talent. Like they're now balancing between two different languages and like the strengths that they bring with that. And I really try to articulate with them like how impressed I am with their abilities of being able to do that. I also think the biggest thing is that strong relationships, really establishing at the beginning. And I am an elementary teacher. And so, just recognizing those relationships with the kids, reaching out to them, getting to know about their home life, bringing that home and school culture together as much as possible. Some things that I do to kind of strengthen in the classroom is really just, like I said, like with building the relationships, taking some time to get to know them as they're getting to know their culture, getting to know their home life. What are some of the languages they speak at home? What are some, like who are they living with at home, and talking about relationships within other siblings within the building, with their family background, getting to know, like, what is their origin? Were they born in the United States? Were they born somewhere else? And helping me get a better understanding of their background. I think a big part too is allowing the kids to share their personal experiences. I think they're the experts, their families are the experts, and getting them to share their experiences. And, when we do have our back to school night or meet the teacher night, just really taking that time to communicate and get to know the families of the best that I can do to best serve them in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you. Megan, do you want to piggyback on any of that? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think she might be having some tech issues. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that?
I'd just like to add, a lot of times I think teachers who maybe are not familiar with teaching English language learners see them as maybe everything being a deficit, but they bring so much to the classroom, whether they were actually born in the US or they migrated here. Some of our families are coming from refugee camps overseas. And so to think of the struggles that maybe they went to before they arrived to us, and the rigor and as Sarah noted, the perseverance that they came to, those are all characteristics that we can build upon. And they have been through a lot of times a lot more than some of our mainstream classroom students have. And so I think coming in from a mindset of all the positives that they bring versus maybe some what you view as struggles to overcome to educate them, because they bring so much to the classroom.
Thank you. Should we go on to the next question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So the next question, and Lauren, I will start with you on this one, is how do you focus on the beauty and brilliance of the English language learners in your classroom?
Sure. So I really want to piggyback off of Sarah and Toni. I feel like they said almost exactly what I was going to say. But in my opinion, one of the best things that came out of COVID-19 is that as educators, we not only got to know our students, but we really had to get to know our families on a very, very deep level. Knowing the languages that they speak or don't speak in the home, knowing how many siblings are there in the home with them, maybe aunts, uncles, grandmas, grandpas, those types of things. Whether their mom and dad both work in the home, what do mom and dad do for a living? And also piggybacking off of those two, again, really allow your students to tell their stories. Like they said, a lot of these kids have been through more than us as adults have even thought about. Allow them to, talk about that if they're comfortable. Allow them to share it with their other peers in the classroom. Building those relationships with students is critical in the beginning and going all the way through the school year. Another thing I would suggest, just kind of building on that beauty and brilliance of our students, is having books with characters that look like our students, having books with characters that speak the same language as our students. And not only just displaying those books around your classroom, but reading those books to your students, discussing the stories, then encouraging the students to read those same books on their own, Also, I put on my notes to push students to realize how truly special they are being multilingual. It is something that a lot of us that have been raised in the US don't experience. I always tell them that, Mrs. Chadwick only can speak English. Do you know how jealous I am of you that you can speak multiple languages? Another thing that we've done in my second grade classroom, my co-teacher, Jordan Dockery, was absolutely amazing. She had a mural of the world painted on our wall, and we would take little tacks and we would stick, where our students' families came from, because we had a lot of refugees or immigrants that came from Africa or other countries, and we wanted students to see where your peers came from, or to remember that this is where you came from, this is your home. You may be here now, but you still want to hold on to that culture and the different things that you brought with you to the US. Another thing that I love doing is allowing the students to kind of teach about their language and culture. I always tell them, Mrs. Chadwick, I don't know anything about the Somali culture. I don't know anything about your language. Please tell me more. Teach your peers. A lot of holidays, I let the kids stand up in front of the room and kind of explain what they do and how it is. Another thing with being multilingual is that I will allow the students to, if they're comfortable enough, I'll let them teach their peers what things mean in Somali, or what it looks like when they write in Arabic, those types of things. Just kind of following up, it all really matters, knowing your students and knowing where they came from and knowing, knowing their strengths. I think that's really, really important as an ESL teacher.
Anyone want to add anything?
I do. I think, and all of you have touched on it, and the word brilliance in the question really stands out to me, and just the idea of translanguaging is, I think, and Toni mentioned it as well. We so often are the children that are in our classrooms, in our care, because they don't speak English as a first language, or they speak more than one language. It's often seen as a deficit. People are upset about it. They complain about it. All these negative comments that come with that. But I think sometimes just thinking about like the cognitive, like thinking at the science level of what is happening in their brains when they're going between the two languages, and listening to you all of you so far tell stories about how you bring in the culture and the family and all of those things, their traditions, they're just constantly, their brains are constantly going back and forth between two completely different systems, but bringing them together to make sense of them as to one. And I think sometimes I feel like if some people would just realize that part of it, like it is not a deficit, it is an incredible asset that their brains can do something that a small percentage of the world can do. And we have a dual language coach who works with us, and she's a bilingual speech language pathologist by training. And when we do our family literacy nights, she'll start each session, and they've been virtual, so we've had to really change the formatting, but she'll start each session with a bilingual gem, and just kind of helps to explain to the families, like, this is what's going on in your child's brain. This is also what's going on in your brain as you're learning the languages now that you're here. And in this case, many of them are immigrants to the country. So I think just everything, there's so many aspects to think about when we consider the assets that the children are bringing to our classroom, and just also that scientific level of it.
Such a great point, because it's like, I mean, we know that if you look at like that brain development, if you look at like how babies learn language, and then how, and I'm not a scientist, but I know like this much about it, but just thinking, we know as adults, it's like way harder for adults to learn a second language. So the fact that we have students that are, to your point, like it's amazing. It's beautiful and brilliant. Anybody else want to piggyback before we move on to the next question? Okay, so this one's kind of open to whomever here. So what are some of the ways, and you've kind of touched on some of this already, but we've talked about translanguaging as this way of kind of bringing languages together, and allowing students to have that authentic use of language in the classroom. So what are some of the examples or the ways that you see that kind of unfolding in classrooms?
Go ahead and start with this one. Early elementary, where I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay. Okay, sorry, I apologize.
No problem.
So thinking more specifically in the early elementary, where I kind of am at, specifically with using and having the native language or the home language in the classroom, and kind of allowing the students to kind of use that without feeling uncomfortable. I think it's important for them to know that it's okay to use that language in the classroom, and that it doesn't have to be just English. So I've seen a lot of times, mostly in kind of more relaxed or social settings, the students will kind of switch and use their home or native language without even realize they're doing it, like during breakfast or recess or any sort of playtime. And it's very cool to see the other students in the room who speak that same language, that they just kind of fall into that rhythm of using that home language. And it kind of helps build their comfort level in the classroom too, which I think is great. And sometimes too, we do kind of use that same thing for more formal settings, like when we're doing math, if we're focusing on a lot of vocabulary, having them kind of process or think through those things we're learning in their home language to kind of help build that background and understand the new concepts or vocabulary we're learning. And I think, at least in the younger elementary, they enjoy when they are able to share, to all of their classmates, oh, well, that's how we say this in my language. And so just kind of allowing the space for them to do that, and kind of use the language and English together to help, solidify the learning that's happening.
Yeah.
And with what Megan was saying, I think one thing that I do in my classroom with also is having the two languages as well, and having them partner with asking through questions. They may need to just hear it in their native language and then be able to have their neighbor help them say it back in English, just hearing it in the multiple different ways. And you talked about academic language, and I think that's a big part of the learning in the classroom. And so one thing that we really try to do in our building, we partner with our ESL department, is a lot of visuals. Pictures are very valuable for our kids to see it. So when we're talking about like the product of two numbers, well, if you put a multiplication sign next to that, they're going to start to recognize this academic language along with just your basic general language. But I think a lot of visual clues can be, I mean, in all education settings, I think can be very valuable in helping them and having the multiple languages there with that picture so that you can see it in Burmese or you can see it in Spanish, whatever could help the child continue to gain that academic language.
Since I'm at an early learning center, early childhood center, there's just language all day long and just developing, like Jennifer said, and we'll notice they'll combine the two languages in one sentence. And again, thinking how you hear that in a lot of, oh, they can't speak either language well. But if you look at the structure of those sentences that they're putting together, they're correct. Like we've have the caterpillars in the building right now in a couple of the classrooms that are, turning into their chrysalis. And one of the little boys looked at me and he said, "Do bring the caterpillar?" Or he'll, I think it was like, "Do bring la oruga." Like he had one word in there from one of the other languages, but it made sense. Like the sentence made sense. He had the tense correctly. The structure was correct. And so we'll see that sometimes. And then, that's when we prompt them to say it all in one language or all in the other. But I'm thinking about the children using everything that they have and in our case, it is the two languages. We have just those two languages as opposed to some of your other schools that have all of these other multiple languages. As Megan was speaking, I was thinking about it. They also, again, they learn who understands which language. The vast majority of our staff is bilingual, so they know who they can speak Spanish to and who they can't speak Spanish to. And so it is really interesting to observe them when they're in the classroom with their two teachers. And you'll see one look at one teacher and say something, in English, and then go into another room of the classroom with the Spanish teacher and look at that teacher and then just say it in Spanish. Or kind of look at the teacher sometimes together, like, "Can you help me over here?" Like, "Can you help me fill in the blanks?" But again, just thinking of translanguaging as the students taking everything that they know about their language, everything they have at that point, and using it to get what they need, their needs met, and have conversations and stuff like that. So I love watching them. So fun.
Should we go on to the next question? Okay. So what have you noticed? I mean, you've kind of touched on this already, and Dr. Vega, or Vega-Mavec, you also just kind of did as well, but like, just in terms of the confidence and the growth that you see with students, what are you noticing about students when they are doing this, is in terms of their growth and confidence?
I think it just helps kind of set that comfortability level within the classroom when they know they can speak, the languages that come in their head at that time. And then also just helping them see the things that they already know. We talked about how they have a lot of learning that they've done in their first language, and from grammar rules to reading comprehension and all these things they might already know how to do in their first language. Helping show them, how to do these things here, let's translate it to English, and just kind of show them they have a lot of knowledge already, and to show how that translanguaging works to help build their confidence in learning a new language, especially.
I'm going to piggyback off of what Sarah said earlier. Visuals are huge with this. And also reminding them, kind of like what Megan said, you know, we've learned this, you know this, you can do this, like just giving them that confidence and giving them that safe feeling in the room where I've done this before, I've talked about this, I've learned this vocabulary and I can do it, whether it be in English or whether it be in Somali or Spanish. Just providing them with those visuals and things, because it's like a light bulb can go off in their brain and say, oh yes, I remember doing this because I see it again.
I think two things to go with that. When you're maybe asking a question and you do want the reply to be in English, setting them up for success by providing the visuals as they shared, but also giving sentence stems and sentence frames so that they can structure the language to deliver a response in the way. So you're scaffolding it there for them. But if they get to a point where they can't, or they don't feel comfortable saying it, also providing them that opportunity to maybe say it in their native language to someone else in the classroom who can then communicate it in English to the rest of the class, and celebrating their success either way that they deliver it, to help boost their confidence and make them feel comfortable to continue to share and grow.
I would just add to that too, you know, I think when we are talking about this, a lot of, we tend to like emphasize literacy because this is very literacy based, but when you talk about other content areas across the day, I think these practices that you're all talking about it's important to emphasize the use of them across any content area, because literacy is across the entire day, right? So it's like, if you're doing math, you know, Sarah, you brought up the example of using those visuals in math, but whether it's science or, you know, whatever it is, some of these strategies that you're talking about and opportunities for students to be using multiple languages can occur across the day, regardless of the content area. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question.
So Toni, I think I'm going to start with you on this one. What are some of the ways you connect your students' histories or culture to content areas? And then how do you modify curriculum and resources to ensure relevance to your ELL students?
So a lot of us have already spoken on the importance of getting to know your students, building those relationships. In my first year in KCK, I did a summer ESL program through the district, and Dr. Socorro Herrera out of K-State was there teaching us about biography-driven instruction. So I think in order to, you know, adapt the curriculum or the resources, you first have to know your students. You have to know who they are. You have to know, you know, their nation of origin, their ethnicity. And I think it's kind of a fine line to figure those things out. You don't want to be too intrusive in asking questions, because some people might not want to share of their history because they might, you know, be here illegally, and that's never, you know, a concern for us. We're here to educate our students. So I think just talking with families, talking with the students, using people in the building, your counselor, a migrant advocate, an ESL aide. At the building that I just came from, our ESL aide been there for 20 years. She knew the families inside and out. They loved talking to her. So first you need to know your students. Once you know that, you can start adapting things. We've already talked about read aloud. So you want to, representation is so important. You want to show your students in the read alouds, but also a lot of our books, especially like fairy tales and fables, may have been adapted to different cultures. So like Little Red Riding Hood or Lan Popo in Chinese, you can change the book out and still get the same you know, targets or whatever your objective was for the lesson by using books that are representative of the students in your classroom. I taught kindergarten for years, so I would often in our morning message sneak in words from my students' native language, and I would kind of also just carry around a list of words or phrases that I could use for my students whose native language wasn't English, so that I can give instructions as well. When I taught in the older grades, I would think about where my students came from, and a lot of them were from Hispanics of countries of Latin origin. And so we did some writing around the Dream Act. We read a book called The Circuit because of some of our families were migrant workers. The book, The Circuit, is about a boy who moves from different school to school as his family moves around for different jobs. They're in the agricultural industry. So I think knowing your students and then just making small changes to show representation or to include them. When we grew up, so many of our books and our resources did not represent different cultures and different races. And a lot of those resources still exist in our classrooms today. So you have to go online and search to find pictures sometimes to represent our students. And then just start infiltrating that into what you use in the classroom. And like in kindergarten, sometimes when we were writing story problems, I'd say, okay, give me, we're going to write a story problem today. And I'd call on a student to give me a name. So it's not just your typical name, Jim, John, Kim, and Sue, that you might read around your book. They're giving you maybe their sister's name. Okay, and they ate so many, what did they eat? What's your favorite food? And then they're telling us their favorite food and they're writing in, and maybe it's one of their native foods. So it's always connecting to those students. But again, that first step is getting to know them. And I would encourage anybody to check out Dr. Herrera's work. And she has a lot of great strategies on how to use their biography and their history to drive your instruction.
And with what Toni was sharing, I think like those are great examples. And I teach a 5th grade classroom, and so they're a little bit more involved and a little bit more, you can stretch their thinking a little bit more, but just giving them ownership in the learning, like taking a problem. Or a book that we've done before is called Stormy Seas, and it's about different experience of students that are about their age range and their immigrant process from wherever they're coming from. And it's a nice comparison of immigration in like the early 1900s and to where we're at now. And then allowing the kids, again, feeling comfort and ownership, sharing their stories, because I think when they see there's a lot of parallels out there, they're willing to kind of be a little bit more comfortable with what they went through or what their experience is. And I think the more times that we can provide our students with just an opportunity to share their stories, not only are we as their teachers learning, but it's helping them really feel like they're a part of the school.
You guys have touched on this in multiple questions, but what are some of the other ways that you develop identity for your students? And Lauren, I'll start with you with this question. What are some of the ways that you develop identity for your students through your instruction?
Well, like we've kind of already touched on, obviously knowing your students is a big deal. Okay,
Right.
That's number one. That's going to allow them to feel comfortable and confident in those types of things. I also believe that having a routine, really helps our ESL students to know, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're doing this, and then we're going into guided reading. That really allows them to to feel really comfortable and safe. Also piggybacking off of your previous question is having good curriculum and having good lessons that really build on that prior knowledge and continue to build. You really want them to be comfortable and confident. And even if that means that you go back and remind them, hey, we just did this yesterday, let's go back and let's pull from your long-term memory, or using that metacognition. Another thing I put in my notes is that vocabulary instruction is huge. And a lot of the ladies kind of touched on this, is teaching them the vocabulary in their home language first, and just showing them like, you already know what this is it in English, let's build on that. Another note I put in here is that vocabulary instruction is probably not something that's going to happen in your big whole group setting. It's probably something that's going to happen in the small groups, maybe during pullout. And that really helps your students to kind of develop that identity and say, I'm confident, I can do this. Miss Chadwick taught me this already. Another big thing that I like to do is just kind of explaining to kids, hey, I know this can be really hard for you. Let's work it out together. Let's do it together. Also building on what Toni was saying about, changing books out and swapping books. we use a curriculum called Wit and Wisdom for English language arts. And it's a great curriculum. It's very driven, it's organized well. But in some of our modules, you see a lot of, white characters. So we have pulled a lot of those. In our second module, we learn about the journey of a pioneer. And there is a young white girl, and it's a diary, and she writes about how her family journeys. And we actually pulled that book out and replaced it with an African-American young girl who kind of does the same thing with her family. And you're still getting the same objective. Students are still getting what they need. They're just seeing their identity portrayed in what we're talking about. So I think that's huge. I mean, really showing your students that you're safe here, you can make mistakes here, look at these people that look like you. I really, really think that helps your kids develop an identity in your classroom.
And I think throughout the building too, that's important. Having pictures, like in our building, we had pictures of our students from, maybe years past, but all throughout the building. So they're seeing representation and probably some familiar faces. And then we have words and phrases in the building that are from different languages too. So I think it just helps create that feeling of inclusivity.
I think it's also important as a teacher or an educator to kind of always be checking your assumptions or biases that you might have. For instance, at our school, we have a very large Somali population, and it can be easy to fall into the trap of assuming that all the Somali population, they're similar in ways, which they are, but they also have their own unique family traditions or activities. So like spending the time, going back to really knowing your students to see within that population, they are unique and different, and taking that time to find that can help bring about their identity and help them feel more unique and important in the classroom.
I think it's my turn. So moving on to the next question. And we have talked a lot about this, but any last thoughts, just the role of building relationships with the students and their families and community. So any other thoughts on the importance of building relationships? I think we've covered it. It's, you gotta do it. If you're gonna have any success, you need to build those relationships. As each of you was talking, we have a family advocate who she does the enrollment process with all of our families. And so as you're talking, I just keep thinking about the work that she does and how she's that first person that they come into contact with. She's warm, she's friendly, she's accepting, and she just has these amazing conversations with them from the very beginning to put them at ease. And then that is, and I think to myself, if we didn't have her right there doing what she does so well, it would make our job a little bit harder, but she just builds that trust with them, and they'll ask, ¿Dónde está la otra? Where's the other one? We would have talked to the other one. But we take advantage of it. We go with it because we know that they're willing to open up to her, and they're willing. And she was standing at the door, or she walked up to the door, and there were two dads there, and one of them was saying to the other, solamente hay que preguntar a la mujer cuando regresa. They don't always remember her name, but solamente hay que, you just got to ask her. Es muy buena. She'll help you. She's really great. But that her building that trust with with the families at the very beginning just helps to open that door so that we can then build our relationship with them as the other people in the building, and to help them. And I think the other, another huge part of that is when you build that relationship is letting, and this can also be part of meeting them where they're at and taking into consideration their past experiences with schooling, if they've had schooling or if they haven't had schooling, or who had access to schooling in the countries that they're coming from. Because that's been my experience as well. As so you have some cultures who you're the teacher, that's it, you do everything, whatever you say is golden, I will do whatever you say. You're going to have some children who come to you with no prior schooling experience, so they're not sure what to do. Or you may have some children who are coming from situations where schooling was only available to certain families. And so, my other experience is helping families kind of understand how we approach education, and that idea that it's a team, and we're here to work together. And if you're willing to share a little bit with me, then we're able to help you a little bit more. But if I don't know, then I can't help you. And letting them know that, I remember having families who would say, well, just tell me what to do. Profe, you just tell me what to do. And I said, no, we're here to do this together. Like, I can give you some information. I can give you some context, but it's your child, your family, you need to make that decision, but let me help you understand, I can do my part. But just really that idea of we're in this together. It's all of us together. You need me, but I need you. And this child needs both of us working together. So I think that's the other really big part about building relationships, is also helping families understand your school or your center or your school district's particular, or you as your individual teacher, your personal approach to what the role of the family and your role is in helping the child be successful.
One more thing I might add is, like, as a classroom teacher, you're managing 19 to 20 plus children, and sometimes the kids come to you and they may not fully know you. And I think one thing in our building is we have a ESL para who is very, very involved in the community and has great relationships, not only with the families and the community, but with the kids, and asking the kids, like, do you have a trusted adult? Is there someone that you're more comfortable with? That's okay if if I'm a new face and they're still hesitant to get to know me, especially like you had said, is that, teachers are seen in this respected way, or the adults are seen in this respected way, finding that person for them to help build that relationship again, because partnership is such a huge component, not just with teacher to student and families, but to, like, again, we're a village. We all have to come together to help each other.
Yeah, great points.
I want to add on that too, before we go to the next question. Before COVID at KCIA, we used to have what we called culture night, or like family night. And we would invite families to come in and kind of explain their culture and cook food, and we would play different games. And I felt like that was a great moment, not just for our families and our students, but also for our staff. It was an opportunity to get to know the families even better, to get to know, like, these are the types of things that we do at home. These are the games that we play. These are the things that we do. I will say that was very beneficial for, not, like I said, not just families, but also the staff. Huge deal.
Yeah. Great ideas. Let's go ahead. Our time is starting to tick away here. So let's go ahead and move on to the next piece. As teachers, many of us are working within a system. And so how do you, can you describe some of the challenges that you have faced kind of working within the system when working with your ELL students, and how do you counter or address those and move through those challenges? Toni, I'll start with you on this one.
Okay, so one of the first challenges I encounter is, a lot of times classroom teachers, if a student is labeled ELL, they say, oh, that child's not an English language learner, they speak English fine. So there's first an element of having to educate classroom teachers on how we identify and support English language learners, because sometimes they don't want to give you the kids, or they don't want your support because they think the kid doesn't need it. So maybe they can communicate and say hi and tell you how they're doing for that day, but that doesn't mean that they have the academic language that they need to be successful in the classroom. So I think first, educating classroom teachers. A lot of times within the system, I feel there's kind of a lack of resources or adequate training of the staff to support our English language learners. So I think our role, a lot of times, I'm constantly advocating for our kids. Okay, we need this, we need that, we need more support here, we need to train the staff. So I think there's starting to be a shift in that. There's starting to be more of an acceptance of, multilingual language learners in our districts. So resources starting to come in, we're starting to get more training. And then I think a result of that is because there's a shift in thinking, because our population of English language learners is growing. It's not decreasing, it's not going away. This is our reality, and we need to learn to support those students. So I think always within the system, we're advocating for our students, we're having to educate people. And I think just also just keeping that communication open. A lot of times there's all these different parts moving, but we're all not connecting together to support those students. So I think getting a system in place where, you know, the counselor and the migrant advocate and the ESL teacher and the classroom teacher, like seeing that we need all time together to work and support those students is important. So I think that's a slow moving process, but that we're moving in the right direction.
Does anyone want to add anything to that question? The response. Okay.
So the next question, just open to anybody who wants to jump in. What are some resources that you regularly use, or what do you consider when looking or using resources to support English language learners? I can get us started on this one too. I was just gonna say, I mentioned her before, the dual language coach that we work with. She actually developed, as she's working with our students, she also focuses on equity and just all of the ideas involved with diversity, inclusion, equity. And so she actually helped our teachers put together a form for every read aloud. And so that read aloud, to gauge the quality of the read aloud and to also think about how it could be used. But one of the questions that the form asks as you're looking at a book is, you know, who's represented? Is it representative? And if it does have characters or topics or themes from a group that's traditionally underrepresented, are they good? Or are they based on stereotypes? Or are they negative representations of other groups? And I mentioned it because it's sometimes we're busy, you're in a rush, you're hurt, you might see a book that looks like it's going to be a great book, but it doesn't necessarily have the best representation of our children. But we always appreciated that she created that form for us as just a quick resource. Like, let me look at a book, let me see if this is a good book. And then, just looking at vocabulary and being able to have those thoughts before you use it in the classroom of if it's not, the book itself isn't available in both languages. And again, in our case, we're just dealing with the two languages. How easily will they translate? What will I have to use to support this book and things like that? But I think that's the other thing is representation matters, but we also need to make sure that it's good representation. It's positive representation. It's not based on stereotypes and misinformation.
I think that's a great point, and something that's been circling in my head as different. Those of you that have just kind of touched on resources too, is this, I teach a literacy course and we talk about critical literacy, which is that, analyzing text and thinking about whose perspective is there, whose perspective is missing. And to your point, Amanda, like, is the representation a stereotype or is it accurate? And so I think that those are really important points. A couple of websites that are like kind of my go-tos that are social justice books. It actually has reviews and scores them on like yellow, red, and green, and kind of gives you some insight, gives you kind of a review on the text and tells you why or why not it is a good representation of a particular culture or person of color. So that's a go-to for me. And then I also really like Embrace Race is another website that they do. First of all, they do tons of really great webinars for parents and educators. But in addition, they have a lot of really great resources and book lists. But I think that idea around critical literacy and really analyzing for those perspectives and for and analyzing for the representation carries up into those upper grades as well. So even if I'm a secondary teacher that's pulling text or pulling an article or a newspaper or an editorial or whatever it is, that students have the ability to then maybe make those decisions more independently versus it being the teacher selected kind of thing. And so that's just kind of thinking about that critical literacy K-12. We're kind of a lower grades kind of focused group today, but I do think it's important to think about those upper grades as well.
We use at our, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Megan.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, kind of a different resource. We use, they're called the go-to strategies. It's put out by the Center for Applied Linguistics, but it's kind of a handbook for like teachers or educators of different strategies you could use for EL learners, anywhere from like community building within the classroom or school to like teaching and learning strategies, vocabulary strategies that can kind of be used across content levels. And I know that handbook is available online, but that's just something we kind of use a lot within our school and kind of build into the curriculums that we have.
Kind of piggybacking off of Megan, when I was a first year teacher, I was of course overwhelmed, and my ESL support told me about the center, let me look it up, Florida Center for Reading Research. This is something that I used so much. It was a great resource. You get on there, you find exactly what you need. We all know that we're swamped usually with lesson planning, so all of that is on there for you already. You just click what you want, find what you want, print it off, and you can use it with your students. Like I said, when I was a first year teacher, it was a lifesaver for my ESL kids because of course I had no idea what I was doing and it was very helpful. So look it up.
And I'm currently in a book study with our district, and it's called Culturally Responsive Teaching for Multilanguage Learners. And what I like about this is more of a reflective learning, where I think we need to be, as culturally responsive learner or teaching, we need to kind of think about our personal biases and our cultural biases that we may have going into situations. And again, you may have your experiences, but what I like about this is there's been lots of like activities. It gives you like videos to watch and see what it looks like in the classroom, because I'm a big advocate of like, what does it look like in the classroom for me to do? But then also gives you like reflective journals as you're seeing the different scenarios, or you're given different scenarios, like how would you handle that? And thinking about yourself, just reflecting on yourself as a classroom teacher. What is your perspective of culture, and how is that different from ethnicity? And just really kind of reflecting, going back on that. Since I've been out of school for a little bit of time, it's kind of nice to go back and revisit these topics that I remember studying 11 years ago, but things change. And I think that's one that's a great book that I would also recommend.
Yeah. I would also advocate for looking at Rethinking Schools. There's periodicals, and then there's also different texts, just in terms of that more professional lens, like you're talking about, Sarah. And granted, I know that teachers, we don't have a lot of time to just, read for fun. But if you do, or have, there's some really great resources available there as well, just to kind of help us think and reflect, as you're saying. Well, that kind of brings us to the last part. So I'm going to invite our attendees, if you have any specific questions that you have at this time, to go ahead and put that in the chat. We did get one question prior to the webinar today that I'm going to throw out to the group here. And we've kind of, again, touched on this. A lot of this is so interwoven that I think a lot of these themes kind of come up for a lot of the different questions. But one of the questions someone had asked was, how do I best approach disciplinary or content literacy with students who are still working to master basic literacy skills, literacy in English? Any thoughts on that one?
We've been in KCK, I took a class on it when I was getting my master's, but KCK is currently doing, and they're training the ESL staff on the Sciop model. And I think it's coming down to the teachers too. But I really like the Sciop model because it tells you how to, plan for a lesson, what you should be doing when you're executing a lesson, and then, assess and follow up. But it gives you ways to scaffold the instruction again, so that you are incorporating different strategies to meet the needs of those English language learners, even if, maybe they're coming in as newcomers. So a lot of the strategies that people have already talked about, using visuals, using sentence frames. I think a really important one is using language objectives in addition to content objectives, so that our students whose native language is not English is going to know at the end of the lesson maybe what they're expected to do in terms of writing and speaking, and it kind of takes away from some of that anxiety and kind of helps them focus in for the lesson as well. And then also giving them time, as we had mentioned earlier, to turn and talk with other people in the classroom, because maybe they're not getting what they need from the teacher, but another student is able to explain it in a different way, or they can bounce ideas off of each other as well.
At KCIA, we used to have just newcomer classrooms where all of our newcomers were in their own classroom, and they would go to specials and things and lunch with other students. But we found that it wasn't allowing kids to be successful like in their content area. So what we have done for this coming year is that we do have kind of the newcomer group, but they are placed with a newcomer teacher and a co-teacher in the general, like the general population of other students. And we feel like that is going to help those kids, like Toni was saying, really kind of giving them the opportunity to have those conversations in their native language, and then also hear someone else having the conversation in English. So I'm really excited to see how our students benefit from that, because we figured out that having that newcomer class is not successful for them.
All right. Well, any last thoughts from anyone before we go? Our time is kind of up, I think. I just want to thank, for those of you that are watching live right now, thanks for attending. I really want to thank all of you for the work that you are doing day in and day out. And thank you for, again, taking the little time to join me here today to have this conversation. We hope to continue to have these kind of practitioner conversations in our webinars in the future as well. We will be posting this information out on our website, as well as social media. And then for those of you in attendance, we'll be sending out the link once we get this recording converted. We'll send out the link and any additional resources that we might be able to curate and house together, so that you can have access to some of the things that have been mentioned today. So thank you all again. I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.